Well, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for the fourth assembly on Harun Farocki and David Graeber's work. And this time we slightly come back to the original topic that we planned to discuss, meaning the topic of labor and labor in relation to violence, which we from the very beginning identified as a topic relevant for the work of both David and Harun. And before we proceed directly to that new topic, or maybe not new, but the old topic, let us do a small follow-up on the previous assembly when we discussed the concept of war in the work of Harun and David. And I give a word to Tom Hollard, who will present us the project Against Special Operation Images, published by on the Harun Farocki website and initiated by Harun Farocki Institute. Please go ahead.
I have to share my, want to share my screen, one moment. Do you see the?
Yes, we can see
the image. Okay, okay, good. And you hear me also? Yeah, yeah. Yes. Okay. Yes, thanks for giving me the opportunity to shortly speak to and on behalf of the Harun Farocki Institute and its call or its invitation to contribute. I'm not going to address any kind of direct relationship, but any direct connection between Harun's work and David's work in this short paper. But I think, I mean, around the question of labor and violence, as you already mentioned, there's something in the very term operation and the operational, which we might discuss in the discussion afterwards. I would like to start right away. I've written a short paper. The Harun Farocki Institute was founded in 2015. To all of you who don't know about this origin, in 2015, in the aftermath of Harun's passing in 2014. In the same year, 2015, the Visual Culture Research Center, an independent para-academic organization founded in Kiev in 2007, organized the Kiev Biennial for the second time, I think, or third time. The center had also been an active agent amid the Euromaidan revolution of 2013-14, where it organized, among other things, an open university on the Maidan Square. It was therefore participating in overthrowing the Russia-backed Yanukovych government, which in turn led to Putin's aggressions in eastern Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. The people from Visual Culture Research Center decided to call the biennial the School of Kiev in order to emphasize the fact that they considered the event to be an educational project at heart. As Vasil Cherepanin, one of the members of the center, explained at the time, I quote, sorry. Our initial idea was that we need more knowledge than art. We didn't want to stage a biennial that acts like an art market where famous curators and fashionable artists come and show themselves. We are interested in the process of studying. That's why all participants are somehow engaged in an educational way. The works of art are not just there to illustrate the ideas we are discussing, but to provide their own narrative of the problems we are tackling. Shortly before Harun had died in the summer of 2014, he had agreed to participate in the Kiev Biennial scheduled for the following year. He was to head one of the schools of the School of Kiev project called the School of Image and Evidence. As the organizers wrote on the biennial's website, I quote, "Documentary image production became a defining political factor in the Ukrainian turmoil. While Russia is deploying its forces of information war and propaganda to further its military aggression, Ukraine is responding with attempts to create a propaganda machine of its own. Documentary evidence is becoming hostage to opposing and irreconcilable narratives. At the same time, user-generated online video is profoundly changing the ways war is documented and perceived." End of quote. When after February 24, we started to think about how to respond to the current stage of the Russian aggression, we found this critical account of visual cultures in Ukraine and Russia in 2015 to be quite revealing and compelling. For one, because it could be read to a certain extent as an exact assessment of the situation that we, and particularly the Ukrainian people, experience today. Moreover, we were of course taken by the fact that Harun Farocki was considered by the Kiev theorist activists as a key reference and model for a critical analysis and the refutation of the abuses of the documentary image by the various parties in times of war. Farocki and others, such as critics and theorists like Serge Danet, Willem Flusser, or Paul Virilio, whom he himself relied upon as intellectual and political guides, as well as those who followed him in his pursuit, have chosen the ideological instrumentalization and ominous truth politics of evidentiary visual production as their object of study and scrutiny. Sorry, I'm somehow stuck here. Yeah. In this spirit, the Harun Farocki Institute published in early March a statement that was also conceived as an invitation to contribute to a special issue of our journal Rosa Mercedes, an invitation we would very much like to extend in this group as well. We called it Against Special Operation Images, a title that carries obvious references to Putin's political military lexicon, as well as to Farocki's concept of the operational image. By conflating, or rather juxtaposing, different meanings and semantic values of the operational and the image and placing an against in front of them, we aim at a critical and probably controversial reflection on the and of the productivity of Farocki's concept, as well as at the question of how information and disinformation, semantic linguistic manipulations, the entire gamut of epistemological and psychological gaslighting that is currently being deployed to discredit evidentiary truth and to take the documentary image as hostage, to once again quote the announcement of the School of Image and Evidence. As you may well know, Farocki has always been a partisan of the documentary image. At the same time, he acted as a fierce, outspoken critic of the many visual practices in film and television that turn documentary image making into an ideological tool in the manufacturing of content and cliché. In many respects, he was looking for ways beyond documentarism while remaining committed to those deployments of the documentary where an image objects or revolts against the representational and political functions it is supposed to serve. In late 1975, he wrote the following about the reliability of the documentary image as a source of historical knowledge. A newsreel from 1947 tends to document how a newsreel was cut and spoken at the time, rather than how things looked then and what a speaker said. Unlike in textual work, editing the negative definitely biases the material toward a particular substantial representational interest. And further on, what is called documentation shows the world as if it were known, which has the effect that a few years later we can no longer experience what it looked like. Images must be made with which today's strange world can be discovered and the present becomes history. So here we have both. First, the critical view of a certain understanding of the documentary image as a transparent window into a historical reality, to which Farocki opposes a critique of representation and the politics of truth associated with the documentary image. And second, a call to work towards the production of a different kind of image that would make accessible visually and cognitively effectively, emotively, the historicity of the contemporary moment. Since the 1980s, at the latest, by the time he worked on essay films such as SUC or Images of the World and the Inscription of War, Farocki became increasingly interested in a type of photographic and filmic image that he would later dub operational image, and which he elaborates in the 2003 lecture Phantom Image that you may have read in preparation. Crucial for this interest was the insight into the interactions and incompatibilities of human and machine vision, of the biological and the mechanical eye, of perception and calculation. Farocki was both fascinated and appalled by what appeared to be a process of an increasing replacement of the human by the machine, of the sensory by the algorithmic, in capitalist production and destruction in factories and on the battlefield, leading ultimately, if dystopically, to labor or work without workers and wars without soldiers. In work such as I, Machine, he contemplated the implications of the deployment and advertisement of the so-called smart bombs deployed by the Americans in the Second Gulf War of 1991, and the extent to which these weapon systems were designed and sold on the ground of a notion of automated computerized vision that is, using operational images that exist independently in a purely intramachinic communication taking place ultimately, or in some views ideally, beyond the reach of human cognition. As terrifying the substitution of conventional representational images by operational images, of human vision by machine vision may seem, for Farocki it also held a critical promise or potential. Two of the early inspiration for a thinking beyond representation and the subjection of visual images to ideology he found in Sergei Tretyakov's productivist concepts of factographic operative literature and in Roland Barthes' concept of an operative language. Farocki read Tretyakov around 1968 when he conceived the notion of operative film in the context of a project of fusing Brechtian education with programmed computerized instruction in a variant of Marxist cybernetics. In a text from that time, he wrote, in strictly lowercase fashion, Tretyakov coined the terms description and formation to distinguish literary genres. The agitational film, or any component of an agitation, is operating. The informing film can speak of anything of its own speechlessness, as well as of a political theme. The operating film can only speak of what is or becomes part of the operation. The informing film cannot be judged authoritatively. We cannot state whether an informing film about a demonstration benefits the police or creates new demonstrators. Who benefits from an informative film is decided by the level of organization of the opponents of class struggle. An operative film about a demonstration decides for itself. It is part of the operation to organize a class. An operative film can be judged by the operation, by how it comes about, and by the place of the operation in the class strategy. The theory of the operative film and the theory of the operation are intertwined. By pulling away the smokescreen of aesthetic taste and moral judgment, Farocki chose the productivist agitational stance in the aftermath of 68 as a revolutionary antidote to bourgeois capitalist deployments of representational as well as abstract images. Without use value in class struggle, any image, any artistic utterance would lose its legitimacy. A few years earlier, in 1965, Farocki wrote a review of the German translation of Roland Barthes' Mythologies from the late 1950s. He was to return to this text repeatedly in the following years and decades, and he particularly drew on a passage from the theoretical part of the book, Myth Today, in which Barthes, in almost Tretyakovian manner, called for the abolishment of any meta-language, by which he meant the depoliticized speech of myth, among which he counted photography and film, insisting on the distinction between object language or language object and meta-language, favoring the transitive language of human labor. I quote from Barthes' chapter on the Myth Today. If I'm a woodcutter and I'm led to name the tree which I'm felling, whatever the form of my sentence, I speak the tree. I do not speak about it. I speak the tree, I do not speak about it. This means that my language is operational, transitively linked to its object. Between the tree and myself, there's nothing but my labor, travail, that is to say, an action. This is a political language. It represents nature for me only inasmuch as I'm going to transform it. It is a language thanks to which I act the object. The tree is not an image for me, it is simply the meaning of my action. But if I'm not a woodcutter, I can no longer speak the tree. I can only speak about it, on it. My language is no longer the instrument of an acted upon tree. It is the tree celebrated, which becomes the instrument of my language. There is therefore one language which is not mythical. It is the language of man as a producer. Wherever man speaks in order to transform reality and no longer to preserve it as an image, wherever he links his language to the making of things, meta-language is referred to a language object, and myth is impossible. This is why revolutionary language proper cannot be mythical. The bourgeoisie hides the fact that it is the bourgeoisie and thereby produces myth. Revolution announces itself openly as revolution and thereby abolishes myth. The call to abolish myth, and therefore the bourgeois image, entails the question, what functions and uses of the visual image may remain? The post-productivist operative film of the radical left around 68 was one option, also for Farocki. But what about the notion and the phenomenon of the operational image, a post or anti-human modality of the image, which can also be called, to draw on theorists such as Alexander Galloway or Jonathan Bella, actionable or programmable image? Farocki seemed to have lost any traction with the Tretyakovian or Barthesian concept of the operative when he worked on the operational image in I, Machine and other works of the early 2000s. One might say that he found himself caught between the critique of mythic language and image and the critique of the dehumanizing effects of the operational image's operations. The denigration of manual labor, the abstraction of work, the pervasive value extraction of individual and collective creativity by racial capitalism, the computerization of production and the monopolist networking of image and text, however, didn't leave much room to fantasize about revolutionary modes of image and world making along the lines of operationality, that is, along the lines of an image that works for and by itself. Today, the operational image of the smart bomb and the drone robot has been joined and partly replaced by a wide array of image and text operations, which are constantly blurring the lines between old-school propaganda, visual war reporting, citizen online journalism, open source image forensics, and investigative aesthetics, etc. Moreover, the term operation has been occupied in the most insidious manner, namely in an attempt to distract attention away from the fact that Russia has started a full-scale war. On the very day of the invasion of Ukraine by Russian military on February 24, Vladimir Putin called the war that he was about to start a special military operation, only to censor and penalize any use of the term war thereafter. That way, he conquered the meaning of the term operation to exclude any association, not only with war, but also with work, with opera. Deliberately, deliberately, one has to suspect Putin used a technical, clinical, and therefore rational sounding word to name his attack. Supposedly, an operation is a limited act with a precisely defined aim to be pursued in an economical, efficient manner. Of course, he could rely on a certain knowledge and understanding of the term, particularly in the West. For a long time, special operations featured in the lexicon of military language. It has been a key instrument of Cold War strategies, especially by the United States and by the United States against the Soviet Union. According to NATO, special operations are conducted by specially designated, organized, selected, trained, and equipped forces using unconventional techniques and modes of deployment. Strategically, special operations are part of a so-called indirect approach, suggesting that, in the words of a US military expert, the ability to operate with a small footprint and low visibility, invest time and resources to foster interagency and foreign partnerships, develop deep cultural expertise, and rapidly adapt emerging technologies. Putin's Russia has relied on these principles of special operations for some while, particularly in its military engagement in eastern Ukraine since 2014 and the annexation of Crimea of the same year, but also before. For years, the Western military community has been studiously interpreting the Gerasimov doctrine and other key texts as open secrets underlying Russia's hybrid or nonlinear warfare. Presumably, these texts aim at the dissolution of any differences between military and non-military actions, between economic sanctions, political or diplomatic maneuvers in warfare, and assume information confrontation, leaving much room for speculation about the actual military or non-military character of such operations, but also about the misleading and disinforming function of these texts and the graphs and images they entail. For years, Russia, and certainly not Russia alone, but Russia in particular, has been busy expanding the gray zone of warfare, constructed by means of ambiguity, of attribution, indirect approach, and below the threshold of open conflict. In many respects, contemporary warfare is about creating epistemological insecurity and instability, about shifting the grounds beneath perception, about producing conflation, ambiguity, indistinguishability, etc. And it is here, in the realm of fascist epistemics and the active construction of a despotic unreality, as Timothy Snyder called it, where any decision in the final instance appears to be left with the arbitrariness or the capriciousness embodied in the autocratic ruler. This said, the operational image as the embodiment of epistemological crisis that Putin, like other fascist leaders before him, has turned himself into, seems to call for a special operation to remove it. However, it should have become clear by now, to fight one operational image with the other would yield no solution whatsoever. And thus we are left with Farocki's call from 1975. Images must be made with which today's strange world can be discovered and the present becomes history. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. It was a very informative and dense presentation, which revealed the importance of the materiality of films and images and how they participate in the production of social reality and social relations. So I think it's very, very relevant to the whole conversation. And although we have quite a big program today, let us make a small round of questions if there are any in the room. Yes, Simona.
Yeah, I've been looking for a photograph I was taught about at school, but I couldn't find it. It was the image of a man running, and it appeared like somebody about to win a game of running. Sorry for my English. And when the photographer enlarged the image, it appeared that he wasn't a man hurrying for his victory in a game, but he was just being shoot on the back, and enlarging the frame, you could see how there was somebody aiming at him, and this man was not winning, he was dying. And this photograph was used to teach me how what appears to be very concrete, very immediate, like a photo that is not photoshopped, it was real, it was just the meaning of the image changed when you enlarged the frame of it. So it was used to say, don't believe in the concreteness of documentary images. And I have also an objection about Roland Barthes. I don't believe it exists such a thing as a language that is not mythical. What's peculiar of human beings is imagination, and imagination means that we imagine stuff before doing it, before felling the tree. The man thinks about images how shall the fallen tree be? Where shall it fall? Actually, my husband fell a tree, and it is very important to be careful of what happens after you've cut the tree, because it can fall on your house or on yourself, and you have to plan. When you fall a tree, you have to take agreements with the people that help you in felling it, and so on and so forth. And there is a lot of imagination of it in it, and there is a lot of imagination in a revolution too, and a collective imagination, which is about which is exactly about myths in fragments of an anarchist anthropology. David said something very interesting about the imaginary world of Malagasy, that Malagasy had a very egalitarian society and a very belligerent imagination. There's plenty of plots of sorceries, of people, mages wanting to take the power on people in their imaginary world. And this is or can be an imaginary border against the possibility that people take power over others. So I think the only way to get rid of manipulation of imagination is to be aware that human beings are people who imagine, and to be aware of how our collective imagination works. And the distinction between real and imaginary is slippery when we talk of human beings.
Yeah, I could respond to it, but I wouldn't like to jump in defense of Roland Barthes in the 1950s when he was trying to establish himself as a thinker on the left, in being dissident of the left at the same time. I mean, he was what he was actually trying, and this quote is from a subchapter or section of this kind of theoretical part of mythologies, where he's speaking on the myth of the left, and he's particularly addressing the ways in which the left has been producing its own myths, its own myth of revolution, and its own myth also of class and class romanticism, etc. And so there's, I think for him it was an attempt to, in a way, distance himself from certain mythologies which he blamed to be an obstacle to the development of the left in France at the time. And this, of course, is a very highly informed by Brecht at the time, and very much placed against a certain kind of leftist leaning of a post-war bourgeoisie, which he wasn't particularly fond of. But as you probably know, Barthes kind of developed into a different thinker. I mean, in the 1970s, he would have agreed much more with your with your argument, and I guess, and it's so it is a really a it's a snapshot in a way, an historical snapshot of a thinker kind of carving his place in intellectual history at a certain time as the leftist structuralist, a Marxist structuralist, which a position which he will maintain for a couple of years and then leaving again. And but what Harun found, I guess, I mean, interesting about this position was the possibility to get rid of certain kind of myths and certain cliches of film theory, film criticism, film aesthetics in general, and aesthetics of the image, and this was, of course, a kind of a project of purification and a very Benjaminian attempt at getting rid of the aesthetics of or the aestheticization of politics on the left as well in the late 1960s. And I think it's they both Barth and Farocki at the time need to be taken with the historical background in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for this answer. And I think we had another question from Avi. Avi, would you like to say something, because you then load your hand, but so I don't know if it was by chance or not.
Thanks. I just had a very short comment, but it might be redundant now that sorry, I don't know how to pronounce Antje comment. I was just going to say to Simona, as someone who's totally ignorant of Roland Barthes, but in zooming out and as you were using the metaphor from that photo, I just made the assumption, reading also the paper that we were given about Graeber, that maybe he just meant idealist abstraction when he said the word mythology, rather than how we might use mythology.
Thank you. And we have one more question in the chat from Andres. Dear Tom, thanks. It was a fantastic presentation. How would you locate Harun's and Andrei Uicha's film videograms of a revolution in respect to the idea of the operational image? It's possible that I pronounced the name wrongly, but so sorry about that.
No, that was yes, that's. I don't know whether this is. I mean, whether this particular film is would be a good example, or would be a good case of studying and exemplifying the operational in image making. Of course, I mean the very material that Farocki and Uicha were kind of were collecting and then editing had operational functions for both sides, for the Ceausescu regime, for the secret police, and for those who entered the film, the television studios, and turned the tools and instruments of governmental visual production of power of the visual production of the ruling powers into their operative toolbox. And so this, I think, yes, I mean, to a large extent, on the other hand, I would say that this is, I mean, these images are which they kind of edited into this narration are in a way kind of highly illustrative of the way images are becoming, and image making is becoming operative in a revolutionary moment. So it's in fact a good example. I have to correct myself here.
Thank you. And if we don't have further questions, because the time is running, so let's just proceed to the next presentation if you agree with this. And so Max Jorge Hinderer from Köln will present us the film The Silver and the Cross, and I hope that you had a chance to watch it in advance.
Thank you. Thank you, Zinaida. Thank you, Antje, for the invitation. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, Tom, to see you after such a long time, and great to meet all of you here. So I wanted to contribute just a tiny bit. It's certainly not as elaborate as Tom's input, and wanted to speak about the film of Harun's film, The Silver and the Cross. I really do hope you had the chance to see it. It's a film that was commissioned for an exhibition that I was fortunate to be part of the curatorial team. It was an exhibition called the Potosi Principle. And could you all just give me a slight feedback so I get like a chance to understand you? Raise your hand who had the chance to see the film or so I know what I'm dealing with. Okay, so it's around half at least, so that's good. Thank you for that. So this film, which is a split screen film that was made between 2008 and presented in 2010 for this exhibition, the Potosi Principle, which was shown at Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid, and then at Haus der Kultur und der Welt in Berlin, and at the end at Museo Nacional de Arte at the National Museum of Art in La Paz, Bolivia. This film was I think, exemplary exercise in analysis of the visible and the invisible when we speak about the analysis of images, and it relates to the silver city, the legendary silver city of Potosi, which is also the beginning of the whole project of the Potosi Principle. I'm going to fill you in about some issues concerning the exhibition, and then just make a brief comment. And be happy to have any sort of feedback of your thoughts about the film. Well, I'd like to, can I share the screen? I just have very few images. Okay, I'll try to. Okay, I think you can.
Yeah, it works.
You can see it, great. So the Potosi Principle exhibition in its original Spanish title is called Principio Potosi, and principio, the word principio, can have two meanings in Spanish. First, it can mean the beginning, principio as a beginning, and principio second as a principle, as a set of rules. And we chose, together with my colleagues, Alice Kreischer and Andreas Siegmann, with whom we curated this exhibition and had 3 years to work together with quite a lot of artists. One of them, Harun, who had actually also the chance to travel to Bolivia, today's Bolivia, and visit Potosi and film there and work there. We dedicated this exhibition to both of the meanings and the relationship they have, because the silver city of the legendary silver city of Potosi at the end of the 16th century, at the beginning of the 17th century, was the economic backbone, or provided the economic backbone for those days largest colonial empire on the globe, which was the Spanish colonial empire, which extended from this Iberian Peninsula to all of the American continent, and also to the Philippines and some parts of Europe, such as the Netherlands, and what we today know as Austria or Hungary, etc. So this largest colonial empire was basically sustained by the silver extraction of the famous legendary Silver Mountain, which is the one you can see here on this, which is part of the image, right? And in Harun's film, at the split screen, you have on one hand the image that he's analyzing, which is an 18th century painting of the Silver City and how it functions, which we could see the image above on this film poster, which is also designed by Andreas Siegmann. And then in Harun's split screen, you would have, contemporary imagery filmed in Potosi and compared to the painting. So the exhibition then dealt with the relation between the beginning and the principle. And perhaps some of you know the book, famous book, 1973 publication by Eduardo Galeano called The Open Veins of Latin America, which is a book which is dedicated to the exemplary cases or to take in certain modes of extraction, analyze the modus operandi of colonial and neo-colonial extractivism from the 16th century to the 20th century. And he describes this with the production of such things as silver, gold, caoutchouc, sugar, to name only a few that are relevant in this book. And the first chapter of this book, which describes, in a paradigmatic way, how extractivism works in the case of the Latin American continent and its different colonial invasions. Potosi is the first chapter, so it's the most exemplary and paradigmatic case, which also historically is the first. The Potosi principle, Principio Potosi, was at the same time the beginning of something, like Potosi is a beginning, at the same time Potosi as this example, as this principle of a mode of production and of extraction. At the same time, when there's we describe this principle of how it is produced, we also describe a new era in global history in which the world is ruled or structured by a logic of accumulation based on the maximum possible exploitation of natural and human resources, as is the case with Potosi. So we found, and this was the cause for this exhibition, that at the same time that this new era in global history that we can call of the modern capitalist colonialism, at the beginning of that era, there was also another thing happening that was crucial to the first one, that maintained an intrinsic relationship to the logic of accumulation that set in that 16th century, and that would be the formalization of the production of images by the Counter-Reformation Church. So it is not at all just a mere coincidence that at the same year, which is 1545, when the silver veins in the Silver Mountain of Potosi were discovered by the Spanish, and colony that later became the city of Potosi were founded. The same year, 1545, was the year in which the famous Council of Trent, which is a famous council of Trento of the Counter-Reformation Church, took place, in which painting or art, but namely painting, were defined as the most important ideological weapon, and formalized as the most important ideological weapon of the Counter-Reformation Roman Catholic Church. So there's a historical coincidence between the discovery of the silver and the setting in of this principle of a logic of accumulation based on the maximum possible exploitation of natural and human resources, and the formalization of an image production that would lead us to an Christian indoctrination, but also to the worshipping of beauty through a defined canon by the church authorities. So we would state that at this very beginning, at the beginning of modernity, there's not only the beginning of a logic of image production and a global distribution of images, but also the beginning of this logic of accumulation based on the maximum possible exploitation of natural and human resources. So having said this, what we try to do is to present images in the exhibition which are from the Andean region, from 16th century, 17th and 18th century. And these images, around 20 works from that epoch, would, you know, some of them be of astonishing beauty. And at the same time, these images would, this was what we tried to show, would be proof of some sort of regime that had set in, that was a genocidal extractivist regime, which gave birth to that logic of a global process. So Harun, at the end of the film, tells us, I'm just going to read the German phrase he says in the original and then translate it into English. Am Anfang stand der einfache Raub, jetzt Wissenschaft, Welthandel und Kapital statt des einfachen Raubs, which means at the beginning there was simple theft. Today there is science, global trade, and capital instead of the simple theft. And what Harun introduces us into is a meticulous analysis of this image that we see in front of us, which shields much more, I think, information about what was going on in Potosi in that period than a simple spectator would see. So our idea of presenting, our curatorial idea of presenting these images with contemporary responses of contemporary artists such as Harun to these paintings, and to question this intrinsic relationship of the worship of beauty and the logic of accumulation based on a maximum exploitation of resources, as we said. We were hoping that an analysis of minds like that of Harun and an eye like that of Harun could give us, could reveal to us some secrets about this intrinsic relationship of beauty and accumulation, and the birth of capital and the birth of art, if we like, the same way in a modern sense. So Harun, at the end of his movie, of this film, explains to us that at the beginning there was simple theft, but at the end, when we go through the history of Potosi within this film, we understand that there was a whole global system. There was a whole new era and development of science in order to exploit the silver. There was a whole development of global trade infrastructure in order to distribute and redistribute around the globe the ore exploited in Potosi, and that there was also well, the production of these images. So at the end of the film, which explains the principle that we've described, Harun reminds us that today in archaeology, the newest technologies make it possible to find out whether some remains of a person analyzed can tell us whether this person had a healthy alimentation or a nutritious alimentation. And perhaps, in the words of Harun, we would need such new approaches for the analysis of images. And what I think is crucial about what Harun tells us in this film, and I'm going to show you some other examples of how Harun traces the reality depicted in the painting with film images from our present and the remains of the present. And we can see different people in different scales in the painting, like you see small figures here, right? these kind of new approaches may have to do with analyzing the relation between the things we see and the things we don't see. And Harun explains to us that in the painting that we're seeing of the city of Potosi, which describes the whole machinery of production, there are certain things we don't see, and those have to do with the labor. While we do see a lot of technological infrastructure with very meticulous representations in the painting, and Harun shows them in great detail in his film. I'll go back to some of these. What we don't see is representations, detailed representations of the body of the workers, of the mining workers. While we do see representations of the clothes to very tiny details of the bourgeoisie, or even of the artisans and domestic servants, but we don't see it about, let's say, the mining workers. So the fact that we do see details of the bourgeoisie and we don't see details of the mining workers could mean something. So in Harun's word, one day we might find out something, we'd be able to find out something about the people we're not seeing in detail through the details we get of those who have something to show, like clothes and so on, that are depicted in this painting. And what I would like to say to conclude is that one particular aspect became clear in this exhibition, and I think Harun's work is very exemplary to it, and has taught me myself as a person a great deal, something that I carry with me and hold very dear up to today. That is the fact that the colonial paintings, they may be of such an astonishing beauty, as they are at the same time proofs of the cruelty of the regime they were embedded in and they were produced by. So there's a relation in dimension of what we can consider the beauty and the incommensurable cruelty of the system that produced this beauty. And when we're thinking about, let's say, claims, this is what I learned when after a few years after this exhibition took place in Bolivia at the National Museum of Art, I became myself director of the National Museum of Art in La Paz in Bolivia. And we were trying to follow an effort by a revolutionary change that had set in Bolivia with the year 2009. That was a new constitution of the state that made Bolivia not a republic, but a plurinational state. And this moment of revolutionary change, in this context, the National Museum of Art tried to strip the reading of these images from its colonial implications. Others would say we try to decolonize, right, the reading and the collections. I'm critical about the word of decolonization in some contexts, but however, the one thing we could learn about decolonizing the collection, which is a collection of these Baroque images, is to understand that getting rid of the images would not be a successful process of decolonization, but that we have to learn that in a process of trying to analyze what happened in the colony, what were divisions of labor and how violence structured these divisions of labor, and thus violence was the only thing that structured global economy, and still does. if we wanted to understand that through an art museum, we would have to ask these paintings to give us information and not to deny neither their beauty nor their content, being colonialist. So we understand, I think Harun did this, and this is what I mean when I say I hold it very dearly. Harun showed us that we have to learn from these paintings, and we have to understand that they are our allies at the hour of wanting to make a change in the analysis. So if there is technologies in archaeology that make it possible to find out whether some person has had a healthy or nutritious alimentation, and as Harun says, we might need these kind of technologies for our analysis of image production, and then we might understand the scaring beauty of colonial imagery produced by this new principle of accumulation we call capitalism. This beauty is at the same time testimony in the judgment trial to colonialism, where we will seek for justice. So we need to understand these images as our allies in order to go through this process. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Max, for this very, very interesting and insightful presentation. And perhaps I'll also try to do immediately to build a couple of bridges between your presentation, the previous presentation, and David's text, so that we can have a collective discussion without doing a proper separate presentation on David. So first of all, I really like this problematization of visible and invisible in the pictures revealed by Harun, because it's also, I think, somehow resonate very much with the idea of the production of subjects in private and public spaces in David's text. So just to remind you, the main argument that David makes in his article Modes on Production from 2006 is actually the argument which he later on develops in his further writings and books. And so his main argument is that the concept of modes of production has been long understood with a specific focus on material production, which ignores fundamentally important idea that the material production is always intertwined with the production of subjects. And we cannot say what comes first, because this is a mutually co-constructive and co-constitutive process where the production of materialities always shape and reshape the production of humans, and the production of social relations then transform the material world. And much of this work, he say, especially the work that really shapes the production of subjects, happens inside the so-called domestic spaces, meaning those spaces that remain invisible from the outside world. So these are contexts that happen behind the closed door. They are not played out in the public arena, public spaces, and therefore this work, which is sometimes a work of care and sometimes a work of violence, remains largely invisible, while the visible game around the production of subjects happens in the public spaces and in relation to the production or to the mobilization of statuses and performances and so on and so forth. And in turn, while listening to your presentation, Max, I was thinking about the first presentation by Tom and the idea of, let's say, what is manipulative and what is true about the images. And I wonder whether in this respect there is an important difference between, let's say, the images of the colonial time and the documentary images of the later time, because in a way, both are taken by archaeologists or historians or contemporary historians as documents of the time that represent some kind of reality, but we understand that the reality is bigger than what we can see on the pictures, that not only pictures can be manipulated, especially today with the mean of different kind of technologies, but the choice of figures to be represented is itself a technique of making something visible and something invisible, or leaving something invisible from the eye of the beholder. Then, yeah, another moment, which I already mentioned, but I can just maybe emphasize it again, is this relation between the production of spaces and the production of subjects, and the production of, let's say, materialities. Not only spaces, but cities are part of those materialities. And they also, what I was thinking about is the duration. Because, for example, what you also was talking about is this beauty of the colonial heritage sometimes, and this beauty which is today conceptualized sometimes as a treasury or as a heritage. These are things that last in time and that remain and constitute this material richness. While at the same time, we know that this continuity and this legacy is only possible because of the invisible violence which was structurally produced by this regime, colonial regime or imperial regime or capitalist regime. And paradoxically, this duration and this longitude, this long period of existence, let's say, legitimize the violence which was at the origin of it. And not only it makes it invisible, it also somehow serves as an explanation and justification of what happened, because it creates its logic. And just like the history of capitalism tends to be naturalized, as if capitalism was always the only normal economic logic, similarly, we can think of these colonial or imperial orders as totally logical, natural, and therefore hard to question. And I have some other points. I'll stop now, and let's collect other reflections and questions and comments.
Perhaps I'll just have a comment. Yeah, I really like the presentation also of how Max ended with this idea of images as allies in the process of decolonization. And it recalls very strongly these images that, I can't recall the chapter, but I'm sure somebody of the deep readers of Graeber will remember when he talks about the chronicles from Latin America and how they're always praised because of the prose or because of the style or because of, but never about the content, you know. So that's a strong case about how much these texts are actually allies of Graeber and Wengrow, you know, when they read them with a completely different idea, which is not so much about, you know, how the lyric or the prose, but just the content of what they describe, which is sometimes forgotten. So just this parallel that I thought would be interesting to remark, you know, in the context of Max's final remark.
Yeah, thank you.
Is it unelegant if I ask to say something?
Sure.
Just because you Zinaida, you were mentioning the endurance of beauty through history or so, and the naturalization of capitalism. I think, you know, if we try to analyze the constructedness of capitalism instead of its naturalization, then we also must. This is what, you know, the this principle teaches us we also must analyze the constructedness of beauty, of course, right? Beauty was not always the same beauty we consider today, but obviously there's no such a thing as essence. It's a historical construct and essence of beauty. It's not. I would say it's not it's neither God-given nor a gift, but it's a condition, right? Beauty, like to be able to appreciate beauty, is a condition, and it's a historical condition. So we just wanted to bring to mind that the big political struggles in history have always also been at the same time, there have been struggles for the dominance of narratives, right? So all political struggles are also struggles for narratives. And these narratives include beauty or judgment of beauty. So we need to keep that in mind, I think, when we speak about beauty, that we're always speaking from a very specific historical moment, and we cannot assume that anything has always been considered to be what it is considered today.
Yeah, sure. I think what I meant is also this, let's say, cumulative effect. For example, I mean, if we go to the Contemporary Museum of any former empire, so we can see, different objects referring to different ideas of beauty, but this whole collection still is a performance of, let's say, this post-imperial heritage, and it doesn't matter whether the spectator immediately recognizes the value or not. The very fact that it's in this museum means that it has this value. So we're taught to believe what is beautiful, even though we probably live in a different era where the conceptions of beauty have changed. But yeah, I totally agree with your comments. Do we have any further reactions, questions, comments? Yeah, Simona and Avi.
Avi, go ahead.
You go ahead.
So I'll be short this time. I'm amazed of how the three speeches are, how they are so strongly related to each one. Each of your speech enlightens the other, and it's wonderful, very interesting. And your idea of what you said, Zinaida, about what is visible and what is not visible in production and in history is gives sense to what Marx and Antti said before, and it's really fascinating. That's all I had to say.
Thank you.
I was just having a thought when I was reading this paper, and I think it relates to all three pieces. Oh yeah, I don't know if anyone else gets the sense when they're doing some form of social science or anthropology. And I was sort of getting that sense in the first 6 pages, and I'm wondering how it relates to the other 2 films, which is people tend to spend a lot of their time trying to make sense of like contradictory, absurd things that powerful people do. So perhaps that inherently creates these weird, simplified, abstract taxonomies, because they're essentially absurd structures or capitalisms or whatever. And obviously, you know, there's got to be a job to do all of that critique and whatever. But it is nice when there's attention to things that are otherwise. I don't know, sometimes I feel like the argument outlined here, at least in the Graeber paper, apologies, that's the main one I'm drawing on and I wasn't so familiar with the other two. But there tends to be this sense that a lot of attention gets put exactly as he described later around trying to make sense of you know, like what's the example before, you know, like a wife trying to make sense of some husband's absurd idea, or some employee trying to make sense of some absurd boss, or me trying to make sense of some weird thing that my manager tells me, or some academic who just makes up a concept and then we have to write a grant about it. I get a sense that a lot of social science is trying to make sense of some weird power phenomenon, whilst forgetting to also talk about cool shit that's happening, which might actually make more sense and might not fit into such simplified modes of production problems. Anyway, I don't know, it's just a sense that I was getting when I was reading. I don't know if that made sense.
Nika?
Yeah, I think that's make a lot of sense, because it's putting back to what we are doing, all these conversations, the same power dynamics that is going on in the other part of the world. Yeah, exactly. That's from the paper, from the lecture where David wrote about his mom dying and how he wasn't bureaucracy and stupidity. Exactly what you quoted. I also want to say that when I propose this theme about slavery and labor and war, I was first thinking about what constitutes a slave, and this abstraction of human being who is deprived of his or her social ties and become this kind of invisible object by itself. But yeah, that's interesting that it went another direction, the dialogue.
Maybe also just to summarize this idea about the mode of production again. So one of David's point is that violence is one of the most frequently used modes of production, let's say. So this is the machine which the machinery of creation, of subject creation. For example, if we think of colonialism, so colonialism is a machine of production, but this is a machine of production which creates new types of subjects. For example, these invisible workers, or similarly, we can think of the war, also the machinery productions of subjects whose profession become to kill other peoples. And let's say this mechanical process, or this imagination of machinery and productivism, which is inscribed and embedded in this whole process, operates as a way to normalize what is happening, because it kind of makes it technological and modern, and let's say having a goal or something like that. And bureaucracy is another type of this machinery of violence, producing particular subjects, particularly disciplined. Yeah, something in the chat. Max writes, violence is predictable. Could you perhaps explain a little bit more what you mean?
I don't know. I think I read it in a David Graeber thing, but it's you kind of, you know what is going to happen. It's a predictable action. You sort of, you repeat it. Yeah, you can control it, you know. When you're trying to open and find new ways, I think it's far harder to control, to create the mode of production in that way. But one thing I wanted to say about the Harun Farocki film, there's a moment there he talks about the mine workers. and some of the mine workers are forced into slavery, but some are choose to. There are free workers. Am I right in saying that? And I just find this, I don't know, very bizarre that people were choosing to go into these mines. I don't know. I find that some people enjoyed the experience maybe of putting themselves in this bizarre world that we have no, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I can just clear that doubt. The free labor market was constituted by people who would not want to take the journey back to their home communities, into account, which was dangerous travels and sometimes many months of foot walk and so on. So they would prefer to stay where they were. But what is interesting about forced labor and free labor or wage labor is exactly that relation which started in Potosi, that a forced labor transforms into a wage labor market, and both relate to each other and create, what capitalism calls a prosper competition, which is still based on forced deportation of people from their home communities to a production site.
Thank you for clearing that up.
And then I think it's also a very important comment to emphasize that actually what is called free labor is basically a choice between dying by walking home or at least having a great probability of dying while walking home, or trying to survive here at place, but while taking other risks. But so let's say it's not a choice between an interesting opportunity and another interesting opportunity. It's a choice between two chances to die in different ways. Any other comments? Because normally we aim to have an assembly during an hour. Now we are by 1 hour and almost and a half. But the discussion is, as long as we have a discussion, we can keep going. Yeah, Avi.
Yeah, so I just got lots of rambly thoughts. One was to do with the end of that paper around leisure. When it's talking about domestic and work time, and then it talks about a transformation in relation to that, and just a piece of my own work about leisure being the way of buying off people, giving them leisure time from their work. I haven't really worked out, but there doesn't seem to be. I wonder how leisure time fits into what Graeber is talking about there, and maybe someone can explain it to me because I haven't thought it through. I also just had an example that came to my mind about what I was mentioning before, which I think maybe relates to the operational image, which I don't know. Anyway, I live in the UK, but in the UK during the first lockdown, everyone tuned in every evening to watch and listen to the Prime Minister say some stuff, and then everyone would be trying to make sense of it, and they would tell me about it. I don't know why people put themselves through this torture, but there was set images and set principles and set texts that were said, which then everyone's trying to make sense of, but that doesn't quite fit in my life. This doesn't quite fit in my life. Blah, blah, blah. And then all the media talking about it every day. I was like, that was just absurd. Rather than, why don't you just talk to your neighbor and the people that you know and work out some basic principles of what's going to work? I don't know, it seemed to be so abstract. It was really weird.
Yeah, thank you, Avi. But do you mean that I wonder how you put this observation, let's say, in the context of what we just discussed. So that it's where you see, let's say, the production of subjects. So as the state, by giving the policy of staying at home and in a way created a new type of subject, the COVID subject, or I don't know how we can call it, or you mean here something else, and rather that let's say subjects produced by different forms of machineries implied in the past then do not fit to a new form of subjectivity.
Probably wasn't saying something that clever now. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Max. Bye.
I guess I was just trying to point out this idea of what seemed to come through in Tom's, sorry, I got your name wrong earlier, Tom's comments on Harun and their mentioning of Bart, which was how the image was being used. And I was just broadly interpreting image being video projection, you know, or announcement or whatever, which is a form of image. In this kind of absurdly mythological way. But I don't fully understand what the Harun point was yet because I haven't understood it. So maybe I need to understand that first.
Yeah, if I could, I mean, I wouldn't have an answer to it because it's towards the end of my presentation, I in a way suggested that or insinuated that the way Putin is using his own image and his own speech as a kind of operation and therefore an operational image that might be, I mean, a similar interpretation might be applied to Johnson's appearances during not only during the COVID time, but almost at every stage of his life as a politician in this with this kind of public attention he has, that he's kind of constantly trying to make operative his own body, his own voice, his craziness and his evilness in a way, to make it turn it into the most efficient and effective political machinery thinkable by using means that are not necessarily associated with efficiency and politics even. And so this and a similar thing is kind of right now happening with all these kind of new kind of illiberal autocratic leaders who kind of constantly manipulate their own image to make it even more operative and efficient. And this is, of course, a completely different take on the operational image than Harun tried it with regard to these kind of machinic images who only kind of speak to themselves in a way, or speak to the machines in which they are implemented or integrated, and therefore don't need any human viewer anymore. But in a similar way, I mean, Johnson and Putin don't need these human viewers. To a certain extent, they don't need them neither, because they are what they need are, I mean, in a way, reactions that can be counted by or kind of quantified with algorithmic means and by way of online social media. And it's so this is where the efficiency actually arrives at, and or is being registered. Otherwise, I mean, of course, it's also highly affective, and politics and the politics based on threat and on kind of fear mongering, etc. Of course, but it's also very much, it's almost directly channeled into those kind of onto these platforms where these responses, these reactions can be counted, calculated, and therefore becoming even more manipulable than they have been than if you would just be in the presence of a human that is frightened by what you are saying or by how you're acting. Sorry, that was a bit long, but it's
yeah. I think it's very interesting that indeed those pictures are created already while taking into account other machineries and other technologies that would work with them. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. They're already applied in or integrated into assemblages, into kind of techno-cognitive assemblages, and these and therefore they can. I mean, their efficiency can be calibrated that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's also probably because Putin and whatever else ruling guys, they are like we're kind of trying to interpret them because they are our power. They're like drunken father coming home. What else they're gonna say? You know, COVID stop, COVID start, war started, something else. Everybody go to, you know, to some place where you will become soldiers. So that's exactly the same type of commands. We're trying to find out what is for us there. That's why English people, I think, was watching them. Have you been watching Johnson? Avi, did you watch this news?
I mean, no, I mean, I don't, that's not my interest in life. No. I'm not begrudging anyone else. I'm just saying.
I think this is the whole irony that while we analyze those pictures, we don't actually watch this. So we analyze them more as separate pieces that then also operate as quotes, because then they are multiplied and reposted in different media. Mm. Yeah.
I do watch and listen to the people that watch and listen to them.
Yeah. For an anthropologist, it's perfect. Well, should we conclude? Yeah. Well, I think it was really a great, very interesting and intense discussion. I don't know yet what will be the topic of our next session. Probably we'll continue with the problem of labor, but what are the concepts we will put in relation? Probably we will think a little bit more further after this assembly. And so thank you all for being here, for joining, for making presentations, Tom and Max who left. And let's stay in touch. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Zinaida. Thank you. Thank you.